Suburban Sentinel here, along with Bella the camera cat, with episode number 3 of our series in gun buying strategies. As a quick review, in part 1 of this series, we discussed the differences among relative needs, absolute needs, and wants. In part 2 of this series, we started to get into the nitty-gritty of the gun buying methodology. Specifically, in part 2, we identified the purpose or purposes for which this particular product was being procured. Second, we established the needs or the specifications for this particular product, in this case, a handgun. And third, we identified the wants or the preferences that are beyond the basic needs to accomplish the job. We left off at the document that now appears on the screen. Essentially, this is a list of all the wants or preferences, not the needs. We've already taken care of that. This is a list of the preferences with a priority value assigned to each preference. A 1 being nice to have, a 5 being really important but just shy of a need. So each preference was assigned the value between 1 and 5. So here's where we begin our preliminary research on specific firearms. What you're going to do is take note of your Category 4 and Category 5 preferences. Those are the 2 highest categories in your priority list. So by way of example, when I was shopping for 3 home defense weapons, my preferences or high preferences were 9mm Luger chambering, solid track record. Those are my Cat 5 preferences. Also, I have 2 Cat 4 preferences. Single double action and easy maintenance. So now I'm going to start researching guns, and I'm going to limit my search to 9mm single double action handguns. Well, we are fortunate in the United States to have a very large market, and there are plenty of 9mm handguns available, and there are plenty of single double action handguns available, but at least we've narrowed down the market somewhat just by those first 2 categories. In addition, I'm looking for handguns that are relatively easy to maintain, especially out in the field, and guns with a solid track record. Now, you can do the research any way you see fit. Typically, I start online and then go by manufacturer, at least reputable manufacturers. And you can narrow out very easily the type of action and the calibers. And then maybe by going to some trusted review sites or trusted reviewers, you can look at guns with ease of maintenance and good solid track records. Now, this can be a little bit challenging in the event where you end up with either too few guns or far too many guns for your particular preferences. It's kind of a judgment call. You don't want to have to sift through data on 100 guns. If 100 guns satisfy this criteria, you're going to be overwhelmed. And conversely, if there's only 2 or 3 guns that satisfy this criteria, you're not going to have very many options. So what do? If your research yields, let's say, 100 different firearms that satisfy both your Category 4 and Category 5 wants, that's going to be very burdensome. So in that case, what I would do is step down and not only include Category 5 and Category 4 priorities, go down to Category 3 as well and see if it narrows your search. Personally, I prefer to have the search results whittled down to no more than 15 items, or in this case, 15 different handguns. If, again, going down to Cat 3, still gives you too many results. You can go down to category 2 if necessary. In my experience, going just to category 5 and 4 should get you kind of where you need to be. In rare circumstances do you need to go down to 3. Conversely, if your search results using categories 4 and 5 preferences yield only 2 guns, try dropping the category 4 priorities and only do category 5. And that should get you up to a reasonable number of choices. Once you have identified 10, 12, or 15 guns that satisfy that criteria, you're going to want to make a list of those guns. On this particular list, all I did was, again here, duplicate the preferences that I'm looking for in these handguns. And across the top of the page, I have written down some of the firearms that satisfied my category 5 and category 4 preference purchase criteria. I'm not sure if you can read this on camera, but I got here a SIG SP 2022, Ruger P95, Glock G19, and Beretta PX4. There were other firearms too, but just for example purposes, I'll use these 4. Again, here are my preferences, and I also included the priority value of those preferences. And what you're going to do is simply score each of the firearms. If the firearm includes one of the preferences, score it appropriately in that category. So for example, first category is 9mm Luger. All of these firearms are 9mm Lugers, so they all get 5 points. Also, by way of example, factory night sights was a preference that was worth 1 point. And only the SIG received that 1 point because that was the only one available with factory night sights. Some values require a little bit of a judgment call, although it's not really that big a deal. Take, for example, ease of maintenance. I gave the Glock a 5 because Glocks are very easy to take apart, whereas the Ruger P95 takes a little bit more manipulation. There's a separate pin that needs to be removed. So you can kind of assign an appropriate value as you see necessary. Once all your values are input into your little data sheet here, you just simply total up the points. So I don't think you'll be able to read all this on camera, but essentially here the SIG and the Glock 19 tied for first place with 24 points apiece, and the Ruger P95 came in third with 23 points, and the Beretta PX4 with 22 points. Again, I had more firearms than this. I believe I had 8 or 9 guns on my list, and this is just a sampling for demonstration purposes. So let's assume now in your quest to buy a new firearm, you now have a list of 8, 10, 12, whatever handguns that you have a score assigned to each one of them. Now what you want to do is narrow that list. And for me, the magic number seems to be somewhere between 4 and 6. Whatever happens to work for you, 5, 6, 7. You just want to whittle it down so you're not overwhelmed with research. And essentially, you just want to eliminate the lowest scoring guns. I tend to do is just take the lower half of the scoring guns and toss them out. And that's essentially what I did with this analysis. The other guns that I included when I was shopping for these 3 weapons had significantly lower scores than these 4. I rewrote this so it's easier to see on camera. This is the SIG SP 2022, 24 points, the Ruger P95 with 23, the Glock 19 also with 24, and the Beretta PX4 with 22 points. So I've narrowed down my purchase to essentially 4 guns and I have not left my desk. And that's pretty efficient. So what do we do next? Hit the gun store? Not quite. There's still that one little pesky thing that's been hanging out there called the budget. One last step before we actually hit the bricks is we want to see how the guns we have narrowed down comport with our target numbers. All of these firearms can be had, at least at the time, for $600 or less. Now that was substantially over my budget, but I wasn't ready to exclude these firearms yet, just because there's always the option of finding a really good deal somehow or buying on the used market. If my narrowed research resulted in one or more firearms that was substantially over my budget, say for example that one of the guns on the list was just brought to market and retailed for $2,000 and had a street price of $2,000 and there were none to be had used, I would automatically cross that off the list, just because it would be impractical to find something anywhere near the amount of money I wanted to spend. So essentially these 4 guns were on my list, and now we're ready to go shopping. So now that you have your list, go to your local gun shops or wherever you can put your hands on these firearms, at least to get a feel for them, for the size, the weight, the trigger action, etc. It certainly would be nice to be able to shoot all of them. I almost never have that luxury of being able to shoot a gun I buy in advance. Is it ideal? No. It's also not practical for me to find both the gun and a place I can shoot without buying the gun first. But I think it's important to at least handle the gun before making a purchasing decision. In this example, when we were shopping for these 3 guns, of course my wife came along because she's a primary user of these weapons as well. And one of the things we discovered is that she did not like the ergonomics or the feel of the Glock 19. She didn't like either the Gen 3 or the Gen 4 Glock, coupled with the fact that it's striker fired and she prefers single double. She had serious misgivings about the Glock, and although I think it is a great gun and it was tied for the high score based on the analysis, we struck it off the list. All right, so once we said goodbye to the Glock as a contender, and don't get me wrong, I'm not anti-Glock in any way. I think the Glock is a great gun. It just didn't suit all of our needs. We came down to 3 finalists: the SIG SP 2022, the Ruger P95, and the Beretta PX4 Storm in 9mm. I'm relatively sure that I would have been happy with any one of these 3 guns, but we had to get into the nitty-gritty of budget and value. To really get a good sense of the value that each of these firearms could deliver, we have to look at each one in light of its overall score and its cost to put it in the condition that we want to use it in. So let's take these one at a time. Our highest scoring gun in this analysis was the SIG SP 2022. It scored a 24 out of the 31 available points, which is 77.4%. Now, if you think back on how we established this, all of these guns meet the minimum criteria. The points are attributable to our wants. So anything that scored 100% would be essentially a gun made just for us. And I don't think there's any gun out there that would satisfy everybody 100%, but having 77.4% satisfaction on a mass merchandised item is pretty good. In order to get my top scoring gun, in the condition I want it, we wanted 3 guns and a total of 9 magazines. And I think the SIG only came with 1, so we would have to buy 2 per gun. So the total cost for the project, not including any spare parts or ammunition, was going to be just a hair over $1,500. Essentially 50% more than my budget, but then again, the budget is a target. $1,500 I still think was a good value. Moving on to our next gun, the Ruger P95, scored 23 out of 31, 74.2%. Again, that's pretty good. And the outstanding thing about the Ruger is the Ruger came with 2 magazines, so we only had to buy 1 extra one per gun, and the street price on the Ruger was $290. So with a little bit of ammunition and the guns and the mags, I was coming in at $1,000 cash. So that's right on budget. So that's pretty attractive. The Beretta PX4, I really like that gun. It scored a little bit lower, a 22 out of 31, which is 71%. The gun was a little pricey though, at least in my area. The gun was running street around $550. Also, the Beretta was the priciest of the 3. The 3 guns and 9 magazines were going to run over $1,900. So when it came down to it, essentially we eliminated the Beretta because it was the lowest scoring of the 3. And don't get me wrong, Beretta fans, I think the Beretta is a terrific gun. But of these 3, it scored the lowest and cost the most. So that was easy enough to eliminate from contention. So that left us the SIG SP 2022 and the Ruger P95. Now, if I had unlimited funds, I think I would have bought the SIG. Why? I've never owned a SIG Sauer. I think I'd like to try one at some point. And I really like the fact that the SIG Sauer had a decocker, but no safety. The Ruger P95 also has a decocker, but it doubles as a safety. However, I live in the real world where money is not unlimited, unfortunately, and the Ruger won out. And it's very evident here that the project cost for the Ruger was $1,000 even, the SIG $1,500 and change. $500 extra wouldn't be the end of the world, but it's $500 that I really didn't have to spend, especially given that overall ratings wise, they were pretty close. The SIG at 77.4 and the Ruger at 74.2. So for a gun that's 3.2% quote unquote better from my perspective was 50% more money. Again, the whole purpose of this exercise was to purchase guns on a rational basis. So no doubt the Ruger P95 was the clear winner. And on that same day, I went to my local gun shop and bought 3 of these guns. And this gun has been safety checked, by the way. It's on camera. And I have to say, I am very happy with this purchase. This is not the end of the videos in this series. We covered a lot of ground today, but I want to talk a little bit more about opportunity costs and some of the nitty-gritties about budgeting. But I believe that this methodology will help most people improve their chances of a relatively easy and highly successful purchasing and ownership experience with their firearms. So thanks for watching. This is the Suburban Sentinel, along with Bella the camera cat. Hard at work, as you see. Questions and enlightening comments are always welcome. Please subscribe and shoot safely, everybody.